And now we're here with a Gratz Cadillac, and we'll service from my right side all the way to the left and from the top down to the bottom. So I'm going to start over here by the rollback bar, and we'll need a variety of the tools that were listed before for the Cadillac. We'll start with the WD-40 and the straw. The straw is important, so please don't lose it. You'll attach it, and you'll use a rag just to make sure that everything stays clean. You'll come over here to the rollback bar, and what you'll use the WD-40 on is the fact that the bar will squeak when it rolls sometimes. And so you'll take your rag over your hand and cup the end where the S hook is. Use your straw of the WD-40 and put it inside the S hook and spray a very, very, very little amount of WD-40 into the groove of the rollback bar. You'll do that on both sides, the front and the back, and then just rotate the bar a little bit, and any of the squeaking that you had will go away. And now, since we're over here, we'll take a look at the springs and the hooks of the rollback bar. You can take them off, and you'll look at the hooks to make sure that they are intact and there aren't any defects or anything in them. You'll want to take a visual look at the springs and make sure that there aren't any defects in them, and pull on them to make sure that the coils separate well and not unevenly. And then you'll look at the clips that attach the springs to the bar to make sure that they're good. And then once that's done, we'll come around to the other side and look at the leg springs. And so again, you'll want to take a look at the hook and at the spring and give it a pull. And then take a look at the other end to make sure that the foot loops and the hooks are all good as well. And I prefer to put the hooks facing out like that, so that they don't get caught on anything potentially. You'll do that with the other spring. While you're here at the end, this is probably where your fuzzies are, so you'll take a look at them to make sure that the attachment on the crossbeam and the cotton webbing are all intact, and that none of the seams or any of the thread is coming loose or torn or even ripped. And you might want to give them a pull just to make sure that they're tight. And then you'll move them back into position. While we're also over here, you'll want to check all of the eye bolts that the spring's attached to make sure that they're straight and tight, and that the eye bolt itself hasn't opened any or compromised the spring at all. So we'll check these eye bolts up here that the rollback bar attached to, and also the eye bolts that the leg springs attached to, as well as the springs on the outside for the standing arm work that we will do. And so these are vertical and they're tight, and there isn't any excess wear on the inside or anything, so these all look good. And we'll work our way down to the other end. We'll encounter the trapeze. So you want to make sure that, again, the hooks on the trapeze are not worn, broken, or defective in any way. You'll want to look at the strap to make sure that it's not frayed or worn. You'll look at the springs. The trapeze springs almost never need to be replaced because hardly any weight actually, they never really bear any weight because we're not supposed to push down on the trapeze when we're working. But in order to test them, you'll push down on the trapeze to make sure that the coils of the springs separate evenly and that there aren't any real defects. You'll take a look at the attachment of the spring to the actual platform and make sure that the quick link is tight and that the eye bolts that attach the springs and attach the straps are straight and tight. And if they aren't, you'll take your 7/16 crescent wrench and a screwdriver and just tighten them up. And you can do that on all of them. on both sides. You'll also want to take a look at the attachment of the spring to the crossbeam and make sure that the 2 eye bolts that we use regularly are tight, secure, and straight, and then that the other 2 that we never use as teachers, hardly ever use, I should say, are also tight and straight, because you never know when somebody's going to want to use them. We also want to make sure that it slides back and forth on the Cadillac well. So we'll move it all the way to the push-through bar side, and then holding the trapeze, we'll push it to the other end and make sure that it slides well. And this one does. If it didn't, that could be a number of reasons why. It could be that the crossbars are just dirty, so that you can take a dry cloth and wipe them down, get some dust off of them. You could also use some wax paper if there are any divots along the top from the knobs not being totally loose when other people have tried to move them back and forth. You'll notice on some of the older Cadillacs that the top side of this bar is actually flat from consistent motion back and forth over the years. And what can also happen, trying to get it, is that you can get a lot of black metal residue on your fingers from it. And if that actually happens, you can wipe it down and get some black residue, maybe not a whole lot. This one happens to be pretty clean. And if that doesn't help, by cleaning it down, you can take a rag, put very little, and I mean very little, 3-in-1 oil on the rag, and then squeeze it, like try to get the excess out, and then wipe this with the 3-in-1 rag. And that will help lubricate, because that's what 3-in-1 does, the metal on metal contact from the trapeze. And that should solve the problem, but if it doesn't, you can always call me and we'll try to figure it out. And so now we'll come to the push-through bar end, and we'll check the arm springs and their attachments and the push-through bar springs and their attachments. So you'll take a look at the arm spring. Again, visually, you want to take a look at the spring and make sure that there aren't any obvious defects or separations in the spring. You want to make sure that the hooks are intact without defect, and that the attachment eye bolts are also perpendicular or parallel to the posts and tight. Again, I also like the opening of the spring to face out, especially on the push-through bar side, because if for whatever reason the spring is even remotely close to the inside surface of the pipe, then as the push-through bar gets used, it might clip the spring or the hook and actually damage one or both of them. So I prefer to have the openings facing out, so you minimize that risk. Then you'll take a look at the handles, make sure that there aren't any defects in the metal or the leather, and you'll want to check your swivel snap to make sure that it hasn't worn too much either, and that it operates properly. And we'll let that spring go. And now we'll look at the push-through bar and the push-through bar springs. We'll look at the top spring first. Again, check your hardware. Take a look at the spring visually. Give it a pull. Take a look at the coils of the springs. And then you'll also check the attachment up here, that safety link or that quick link. Check all of the eye bolts for the spring, the stow chain, and the safety chain. You'll take a look at the stow chain. The stow chain bears no weight whatsoever during its entire life, so very rarely will you see wear. But you'll want to check the quick link, the chain, just to make sure that it looks in good condition. The quick link that attaches the swivel bolt snap, and again, you'll want to check the swivel bolt snap to make sure that it's not totally worn or that it shows any sign of wear. We're just going to let that dangle for a little bit. The all-important safety chain. The safety chain, as it's aptly named, is very important. When a push-through bar is bottom-loaded, this has to be on to make sure that your client's remain safe in case they lose a grip or you as the teacher lose a grip on the push-through bar while they're working it. So it's very important to make sure that this safety chain is always intact and that all of the attachments are in good working condition. You always want to make sure that the quick link up here is tight and doesn't show any significant signs of wear. The safety chain actually does bear load, and over time, the quick links can actually wear out. You want to make sure that the chain itself, there aren't any kinks or openings or obvious defects in the metal or the links. And then you have another quick link down here where the bolt snap attaches. You want to make sure that there aren't any defects in it and that it is securely tightened. If it's not tightened, you can take your locking pliers and lock your pliers over the attachment and tighten it. And there we go. And you want to make sure that it's securely tightened. And then, lastly, but not least, you want to make sure that your swivel bolt snap doesn't have any wear. Also, that the spring clip actually works properly and that there's no wear on the top side of your swivel bolt snap either. Sometimes the swivel bolt snaps can actually break not at either one of those points, but actually in the middle where it swivels. So you want to make sure that it will swivel properly and that it's not worn either. And then once that's done, I actually give it a tug. I know it's not even close to the load that it sees when the spring is on it. But if it were to break when I did that, then you definitely know that it's bad, and you certainly don't want that to ever happen. And we'll put that back up. This Cadillac is actually, it's an older style, so it has one safety chain. The newer styles have two safety chains, one on either side. And the owner and the studio and the instructors are supposed to attach one safety chain to each attachment on the push-through bar during normal operations. That's recommended now. And so once you've looked up at the top, now we're going to come to the actual push-through bar. We'll use our WD-40 with the straw and the rag and lubricate the rod that the push-through bar attaches to. So in this one, it's a little dirty, so I'm going to give it a quick wipe. And then you'll spray your WD-40 right at the corner of the rod and the push-through bar wood, right in there. And as you're doing that, then you'll clean it off. You'll do it on the other side as well. And then you'll just move the push-through bar back and forth to get rid of that metal on metal squeak sound. And you'll also want to take a look at the push-through bar wood itself, the actual frame, and make sure that there aren't any obvious separations between the pieces of wood that make the push-through bar, because the glue over time might actually age and start to separate. So the pieces of the wood, like here, or even here or here, might start to separate and compromise the integrity of your push-through bar. If that happens, usually your local carpenter can come and either drill a couple of new screws in to tighten it back up, or he can take the whole thing off and re-glue it and re-secure it with a clamp. And that's not very difficult, it's just a little time consuming. So now I'll come here to the bottom where the attachments are. Again, this is an older Cadillac, so it has the old Chicago steel or the Chicago iron clevis fittings. The new ones have eye bolts. You want to make sure that they're straight and tight. And to do that, you just need, for these, you just need two straight edges. So I'll use my screwdriver and just a wrench. I'm going to put the wrench on the underside or the short side and just make sure that it's secure. And then if it needs tightening, I'll just tighten the top one up. And this one's pretty tight. And then that's it for the push-through bar. We'll come around to the other side so that we can look at the bottom push-through bar springs. So now we're on the other side of the Cadillac, where we'll take a look at the push-through bar springs from the bottom. You want to make sure that the eye bolts that the push-through bar springs attach to are tight, and that your foot strap is straight, in good condition, and that the hooks are in good condition as well. We'll take a look at the springs. I'll take this off so that it's a little bit easier to see. So we'll look at the spring, and you'll take a look at it, and again, make sure that there aren't any obvious defects, especially when you pull. You'll want to check the attachment and the swivel, and also the attachment here. The bolt needs to be tight, and it attaches with a quick link, and you want to make sure that it's tight also. And as long as those are straight and tight, everything's good on this side. Typically, the right push-through bar spring wears out more frequently than the left because we tend to use the right one more often. And so if you're noticing that, like that the right one's getting a little bit weaker, you can always take the left one and swap it over to the right one and prolong the life of that spring a little bit more. Now we'll just check to make sure that the canopy is tight and secure, and by looking at the set screws on the fittings on the frame, and you want to make sure that those are tight and in, and if they are loose, you can use your 3/16 Allen wrench to tighten them up. And so we'll come up along the poles of the canopy, and you'll see that up here you have some more of those set screws, one on each flange, and you want to make sure that they're all tight. And I usually give the poles a good shake to make sure that they're secure. I pull on them, I push on it to make sure that all the pipes are in and where they're supposed to be. And I'll do that all along for the other end of the Cadillac as well. And you'll just give it a good tug and push. And you can lift it a little bit too. If you have eye bolts on the base, either from the side or facing forward for the bottom loaded spring work, arm spring work, you'll want to make sure that those are tight also, using your screwdriver and a 1/2-inch crescent wrench also. And so that's basically it for the Cadillac. And just a few words about the tower, because it's basically exactly the same. The only difference is you'll want to make sure that the attachments of the tower to the wall are secure. So if I'm looking at a wall unit, I will hold on to the poles and pull on it. And if it comes off the wall, that's a bad thing. So you want to make sure that they're always drilled into studs, or you use heavy-duty wall anchors so that it remains safely and securely attached to your wall. The only other difference between a Cadillac and the tower is the bottom push-through bar springs attach to the flanges at the base of the tower. And those flanges have eye bolts that are very similar to what we attach our normal springs to. And you always want to make sure that those are tight, because if they're loose, the push-through bar spring might come off when it's bottom loaded, and we certainly don't want that to happen. We'll take a look at some of the accessories that we use with the Cadillac, the airplane board and the neck stretcher, just so you can see a few things about how to make sure that they're safe as well. I'll get some of my tools out of the way. And we'll start with the airplane board because it's very simple. Here's your airplane board. It's a good one because it's loose. So when you're looking at it visually, you want to make sure that the cotton webbing is in good condition and that the 4 screws are all tight. And you can figure that out by moving the webbing around, and if the screws are loose, the webbing will move. And you also want to make sure that the eye bolts that we use to attach the leg springs to are tight. This one happens to be loose, so I'm going to give it a quick tighten by using the screwdriver and a 7/16 wrench. Good. And then you'll make sure that they're just vertical and in the same position. And that's it for the airplane board. You'll see on the underside that this is how the cotton webbing and the eye bolts actually get attached. So if for whatever reason any of these T-nuts, that's what they're called, are sticking out from the wood or missing, certainly contact Gratz to make sure that you have the proper setup and that it's securely attached the way it should be. And so that's the airplane board. And now next is the neck stretcher, which maybe some of you have actually never even seen. It's Joe's wonderful medieval contraption to strengthen the neck of his boxers. It looks like a giant toe corrector. And it has a swivel bolt snap on one end. You want to make sure that it's in good condition and that the snap opens and closes properly. The spring it's a medium spring, but it's actually, it looks like a rollback bar spring. I'm going to have to ask Gratz about that. And you want to pull on it just to make sure that the spring is in good condition and that where it attaches, you'll see it attaches with these pretty heavy-duty Allen bolts. You want to make sure that they're secure. So you have a nut and the bolt, and it'll spin freely because that's how this moves back and forth. But you want to make sure that the nut and the head relative to one another are tight for all 4 points. And then you'll take a look at the neck strap or the head strap to make sure that it is also in good condition. This one's nylon, so I don't know that it will ever be bad, but if you have a cotton webbing version of the same piece of apparatus, just make sure that the cotton webbing doesn't have any tears, nicks, or frays in it. And so that's it for the neck stretcher. And overall, that's it for the Cadillac and the tower.